Hello students, once again I welcome you all. In this class you will learn another poem from your syllabus and the textbook. It is titled as Bright Star. Would I were steadfast as thou art. In short, this poem is also titled as Bright Star. Students, this poem is written by John Keats. Probably you might have learned this poem in your schooling. You might have seen thousands and lakhs and crores of stars there in the constellation or in the galaxy. We do love to watch different types of stars that we could see from our eyes. But the way John Keats has given a treatment to this particular concept is probably different than the way we really think of it. As you know, there are many stars in the constellation, and we do love to watch them out. There are so many people, those who continue to look at the night, especially towards the stars throughout, and they do enjoy in their own ways. So this poem, which is titled as Bright Star, is written by John Keats. So before I talk about the poet and the poem, I would like to give you a general introduction to this particular poem, which is titled in brief as Bright Star. This poem is written by one of the most celebrated English romantic poets named John Keats. Friends, as you know, the romantic movement in literature started when William Wordsworth published a book along with his friend S.T. Coleridge, and the book was titled as The Lyrical Ballads. William Wordsworth wrote the preface to this particular book, and the book was published in 1798. And in the preface itself, the romantic movement was introduced for the first time by William Wordsworth. During the introduction to the realm of poetry, I told you the definition introduced by William Wordsworth, as he defined poetry as the poetry is nothing but the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings in tranquil state of mind. And this was really something new, something exciting, something enthusiastic, which was introduced by William Wordsworth, and the publication of the preface along with the publication of the lyrical ballads is considered to be the prime time for romantic moment in literature. And here we are going to learn a poet named John Keats who belonged to the same romantic moment in literature. So the present poem, which is titled as Bright Star, is written by one of the most celebrated English romantic poets named John Keats. The romantic poets wrote in a brief time period around the beginning of the 19th century. Among the most prominent of the romantics were three poets in particular John Keats, Lord Byron, and P.B. Shelley. These three were friends and associates who died at a very young age, but they also left a very powerful impact on English poetry. Friends, you might have been surprised by listening to the trio that I mentioned just before. And you will say that, sir, the name that you told just before, that is William Wordsworth, is nowhere found over here. Yes, I do agree. As far as the beginning of romantic moment in literature is concerned, the entire credit goes to William Wordsworth, and there is no doubt about it. But mind it well, William Wordsworth is considered to be the first generation poet of the Romantic era. Whereas the name of the trio that I mentioned here, that is John Keats, Lord Byron, and Percy Bysshe Shelley, these three poets belong to the second generation of Romantic moment. And as far as the general introduction to this particular poem is concerned, it will be incomplete if I don't talk about Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley. Actually, these three belong to the 19th century. Their contributions are also made in the 19th century. And these three were the close associates and friends. And all of them died at the very young age. But if you go through their poetry, you will realize that that was, or that is even today, very powerful impact. Because the kind of treatment given to the various aspects of nature, human temperament, and the surrounding is something really very brilliant. Romantic poetry is the product of emotion and expresses which presents the poet's love towards any inspiring object in nature. You know, nature has the ennobling effect on our mind. Nature, in the sense, I'm talking about environment. I'm talking about the biological atmosphere that we have around us. And there are so many beautiful things around us. So only you need to have a sight to look at that beauty. And all the romantic poets, I think, put their very sincere effort to present the beauty of the nature in the form of their very effective, impressive words and put forward their observations to their readers like you and me. So here you need to remember one thing, that romantic poetry is the product of emotion and expresses which presents the poet's love towards any inspiring object in our surrounding, that is nature. A romantic poet is often assumed to be a lonesome person, misunderstood by others in his own time. But you know, one pathetic fact about all these romantic poets you need to learn, or you need to know actually. What is that? As long as all the romantic poets were alive, their literature, their contributions were not really appreciated. Mostly, their contributions were misunderstood by the contemporary people. In fact, it should never happen. When S.T. Coleridge wrote some poems, of William Wordsworth contributed immensely to the realm of literature, or even you have this trio that is Byron, Shelley, and John Keats, you will find that. If you turn the pages of history also, you will find that they were misunderstood by the contemporary people. Maybe the people or the contemporary literary figures were very much habitual to the strict rules and regulations and the style of poetry, whereas the romantic poets were mainly giving prominence to one's emotions, one's feelings, and they were focusing mostly on the natural phenomenon that we experience around us. So here you can say that a romantic poet is often assumed to be a lonesome person and mostly misunderstood by others in his own time. It is commonly believed that the poet here is talking to Polaris or the North Star, which is famous for appearing to hold still in the sky. Now, gradually, we are moving towards the actual general introduction to the poem, that is Bright Star. Friends, if you get up early in the morning around 3:30 or 4 o'clock or so, and if you look towards the north direction, you could see or you will find a very bright star glittering there in the sky. That star is nothing but North Star. You also call it Hesperus. You also call it the bright star. You also call it Polaris, that is North Pole. So different names are there, and the people belonging to different regions of this world call the North Star with different names. A few people call it North Star, a few people call it Polaris, and most of the people in the world call it North Star or Hesperus. Here, the poem that we are going to learn is all about the North Star, that is the Polaris or Hesperus. Because of its brightness and unmoving nature, the people like and love to look at it constantly. This star is used as a guiding star by the travelers. In this sonnet, a traditional poetic form characterized by its length of 14 lines and its use of a set of rhyme scheme, the poet John Keats wishes to attain the unchanging and fixed status of the bright star through his love. This sonnet was written in 1819 and was revised in 1820. It is supposed to be John Keats' last sonnet. So just before I told you that this poem, Bright Star, is all about the North Star or the Hesperus or the Polar, that is North Pole. So one thing is all clear now. What is going to be the object of this poem? The assumed object of this poem is the bright star or the North Star. Why does the poet took this object as the central idea of his poem? The reason is also very obvious. According to the poet, and that is the known fact, North Star is a guiding star for the travelers. Those who undertake a journey there in the sea or the ocean, they have only two guiding sources. One, especially during the night time, the only guiding source for them is the North Star. By looking at the Hesperus, by looking at the North Star, the captain of the ship decides his own passage, his own way during the night there in the wide, wide sea. Okay. So here you can understand the importance of the bright star or the North Star, especially for a traveler. And this sonnet, that is Bright Star, is a traditional sonnet written by John Keats. You can also say the present sonnet is in the traditional poetic form, which is characterized by its length of 14 lines. As I told you earlier also, sonnet is a poetic form that has only 14 lines. But there are two types of sonnets. One, the Shakespearean sonnet, other, the Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarchan sonnet is the original form of sonnet that has a clear division into two stanzas. One, the octave stanza of 8 lines, and other, the sustain stanza of 6 lines. And Petrarch was the first person who introduced this kind of poetic form. And in the course of time, the Earl of Surrey and Thomas Watt brought this poetic form into English, and later it was adopted by so many poets like William Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, or Sir Philip Sidney, John Milton, John Keats, so on and so on. As far as this poem is concerned, that is Bright Star, which is written by John Keats. It is written in a traditional poetic form. Fundamentally, it is characterized by its length, that is 14 lines sonnet, and its use of a set of rhyming scheme. It has its own rhyming structure. This sonnet was written by John Keats in 1819, and later it was revised in 1820, and it is considered that was the last sonnet contributed by John Keats. Probably after writing this particular sonnet, he passed away, and this is the general introduction of this particular poem. Now, let us talk about the poet, that is John Keats. John Keats was born in 1795 and died in 1821. Now you remember, just before some time when I was talking about the romantic trio, that is Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley and John Keats, I made a statement that all these three poets died at the young age. And here you can make out very comfortably that John Keats, born in 1795 and died in 1821, so he could survive hardly for 26 years or so. That's all. But the kind of literature, the kind of poetry that he wrote in the short period of time, that is really extraordinary. And in the literary point of view, it has really a big strength. So John Keats lost both his parents, that is mother and father, in his childhood. Despite being qualified in medicine, he never practiced medicine and chose to write poetry instead. See here, I think John Keats was really very unfortunate because he lost his parents, that is mother and father, both in his childhood itself. So that was really a struggling time for him. But out of all these struggles, he could find a way and he became qualified in medicine. But he did not practice medicine at all. On the contrary, he started writing poetry. If at all he would have practiced as a doctor, as a practicing doctor, probably he might have earned a lot. But instead of doing or practicing as a doctor, he preferred writing poetry. He completely devoted himself to the poetry. His first volume of poetry was published in 1870, but it attracted little attention. See, one more unfortunate thing happened in his life. Whereas he has devoted whole of his life only for the sake of literature, only for the sake of poetry. And when he came up with his first volume of poetry, which was published in 1817, it got the less attraction of the people. But in 1818, he published his long and ambitious poem, Endymion, which was not much appreciated, but he was encouraged by the contemporary writers. So this is really very inspiring for the poet, because until and unless you get the expected response from the reader side, from the critic side, or else somebody should really appreciate you for something good that you have done, you won't come up with your own real potential. And that happened in the case of John Keats. He was highly appreciated by William Hazlitt, one of the prominent critics of the time, and others also. The time between 1818 and 1819 was the most fertile period of the life of John Keats. In the same period, he fell in love with Fanny Browning, his bright star, I would say, and composed 6 poems or 6 odes, and such great narrative poems as Isabella or The Pot of Basil, The Eve of St. Anne's, Hyperion, Lamia, La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, and so on. They are the extraordinary contributions by John Keats. Even then, his work was not appreciated by the critics of his time. That is really the most disappointing fact of his life. Today, if you go through the poems of John Keats, you will realize that each and every contribution by him has its own literary value. But the critics of his time did not understand that. He was misunderstood. They did not pay much attention towards his compositions. And ultimately, he was avoided or isolated. Even then, his work was not appreciated by the critics of his time. In 1820, see how the life was really a big challenge for him. He suffered from tuberculosis, that you call TB, and went to Italy in the hope for recovery. But he died on 23rd of February 1821 in Rome. And that was how he got a very short span of time, around 26 years or so. But the kind of literary contributions that he had, or that he has even today, they are really wonderful. In the later part of the 19th century, John Keats received the acclaim that he deserved. Writers like Alfred Lord Tennyson and Algernon Charles Swinburne praised him as one of the best poets of the time. In the today's time also, John Keats remains one of the best loved of all English poets. See, this all happened, but the people, even of his contemporary time, and even in the modern era, I would say, realized the importance of his writings of late. Of course, in the lateral part of the 19th century, he was highly appreciated for his contributions. But as long as he was alive, he could not enjoy that glory of high reputation, name, and fame. So, this is the general introduction to the poem, that is Bright Star, followed by the introduction to the poet, that is John Keats. So that's all from my end for this class. As I said, the text of the poem will be taught to you all in the next class. Okay. So thank you very much.